Good evening, everyone. This is Kim Taylor, Chair of the Harbor Management Commission. This is our July 20, 2021 meeting. We will not take comments from the public this evening. Anyone who has comments that they wish to share with the Commission or be included in the minutes, please send them to the Harbor Commission email, which is hmc@fairfieldct.org, with HMC 7/20/21 meeting in the subject line. Please, if you're sending comments, include your name and street address, which will be included in the minutes. However, your email address will not be included. I'm going to mute everyone and then let me take attendance first. Let's do that, and then I will mute everyone and we'll get the meeting underway. Mark?
Hello, it's Mark.
Okay. Harry?
Speaking.
Jack?
Here.
Ted? Ted, I believe, is not with us. Sam Cargill? No Sam. Eric Sunman? Doug Metchik?
Here.
Great. Libby Trischler? Libby. Betty Gabriel? Betty said she would be joining us. Jeff, you're here, correct?
Yes.
Sam Cargill? Okay. Eric Sunman? Well, we have 4 commissioners present, which is a quorum. Hopefully, we'll have Eric or Sam join us in just a few moments. Okay, everyone. Getting right to the agenda, the first item of business is to approve the May 18 rules. They were embedded in the agenda. Could I have a motion to accept them?
I'll make a motion to accept them. This is Harry.
Thank you, Harry. Can I have a second?
Jack, I'll second the motion to accept the minutes.
Thank you, Jack. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Okay. So the chairman's report. It's been a very busy month. Lots of communications with lots of people. The first item here on the agenda was we transmitted to Karen Wackerman, the RTM moderator, a list of the proposed changes to Chapter 24 of the code, the town code, along with an explanation of the reasons why we were requesting the draft, the changes. On June 17th, we got a letter from Attorney John Casey representing Mr. Owens, requesting that we consider under our Rule 23, we consider the Harbor Master's decision to deny Mr. Owens a priority mooring permit. On June 20, we heard from Jeff Engborg, manager of Pequot Yacht Club. They had generously offered a whaler for the Harbor Master use to us. That request that donation is currently being considered by folks at Town Hall. But in the interim, the yacht club's need for an additional boat, which they thought they had on order has been delayed, so they were requesting that, or letting us know that they were going to be using that boat for the summer for the junior program, but that it would still be available to us if the town approves the request, our request, at the end of the summer. On June 21st, Jack and Jeff and I appeared before the RTM Law and Administration Committee. We'll have more about that later, to discuss those changes to that we're requesting to Chapter 24 of the Town Code. From about that time till actually just very recently, there have been several mooring holders who had not submitted the appropriate paperwork to the harbor master before he left, and mooring holders were having a difficult time getting into their accounts to upload their documents. So there was lots of requests, lots of concern that were sent to the commission about how do I access my account, et cetera, et cetera. We can talk more about that later, but it's really pretty simple. The online mooring system sends an access code to emails and cell phones if you tell them that you can't get into the system. So it's not real clear why those boaters were having trouble, but we did manage to help them get into their accounts. On July 6th, I got a phone call from Kevin Zavoy from Connecticut Deep. He was inquiring about the status of our harbor master search. He had heard from the prior harbor master that there were several or many unpermitted moorings in up Pine Creek as well as along the Fairfield beaches, and he was of the opinion that it might be necessary for us to have a second harbor master to monitor those moorings. And the third point that he made in that conversation was that without a harbor master, the commission, could make no decisions about stationing boats in the harbor. That was the sole authority given to the harbor master. On July 7, Jeff and Mark and I had a Zoom meeting with the Army Corps of Engineers about dredging at the mouth of the harbor. There'll be more about that later. It was an excellent meeting. On July 13th, Betty Gabriel got a phone call from John Fallon representing the property owners at 1101 Harbor Road, requesting that the deed restrictions be in the Lower Wharf deed be enforced, and that signs be posted along that property to prevent inappropriate behavior that was not consistent with the restrictions in the Lower Wharf deed. So we can talk more about that too later. On July 13th, we got another letter from Attorney Casey representing Mr. Owens, commenting on a phone conversation that he had with Mr. Zavoy, and enclosing a letter signed by a former chair of this commission, as well as a picture of part of the Army Corps of Engineers survey of the depths of Southport Harbor. And finally, on July 13th, we received, the First Select Woman received a FOIA request from Evan Seaman, also representing Mr. Owens, for documents for the last 10 years related to all correspondence and documents related to any application for mooring permits related to the 789 Harbor Road property. So a busy month. What I have asked Jeff Engborg, the manager of Pequot Yacht Club, to just describe for us very briefly the safety drill that the Yacht Club conducts every year with the fire department and the police department. I think it's important that we all hear, to what extent the Yacht Club goes to practice with our town first responders to make sure that that everybody is familiar, everybody in the harbor is familiar with what good communications and emergency procedures might be necessary in case of an accident or something terrible happening in the harbor. So, Jeff Engborg, are you there?
I am there. Can you guys hear me?
Beautifully.
Yes.
I can hear you beautifully.
Oh, great. Thank you, Madam Chairman, and
welcome.
thank you for the opportunity to wave my own flag because I'm proud of this drill. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll try to make this, try to do this in the allowed amount of time. So, Pequot Yacht Club, each year, I think we started in 2013. Each year we've been partnering with the Town of Fairfield first responders to practice a safety communication drill that actually takes place on the water at the areas that the emergencies might occur. And it's a pretty good drill. I write the basic drill, but then the first responders from the fire department, the police department, and AMR are permitted to address their sections. So basically what we have is a pre-drill meeting on the porch at Pequot Yacht Club where everyone's handed out some information. Each agency is asked to talk at that time and address their particular discipline and what they're looking for. And we're also at that time talk about what the layout of the drill is going to be like. And it also gives us an opportunity to talk about some items that have been improved on year to year. And that's one good thing about repeating this drill is that we're able to make adjustments each year. The drill happens on the water, which I'll explain in a minute, and then after that, we all meet again on land to discuss what happened, and there's a question and answer session, and then there's a little bit about planning for next year. So it's really a community safety drill that Pequot Yacht Club starts, and everybody participates. We had about 37 different people involved with the drill this year, which was excellent. One thing about the drill is it promotes communication between all different responders, which is kind of neat, and it's designed to overwhelm any individual organizations, so it kind of forces us all work together to work together. The police department lends the yacht club 10 buoys that are numbered 1 through 10, and these buoys become a simulated human being in the water at different locations. We start out with one simulated propeller strike at Frost Point that the police and fire respond to, and then there's 3 other groups of 3 buoys in the water that simultaneously get called in as if we had a disaster or a propeller strike. We're all very careful on the radio to communicate with each other and not to call them victims or drowning. They're called buoys, and they all have numbers 1 through 10, but they get mixed up, and different agencies have to find buoy number 2. We know that 2, 3, and 4 might have been on a single boat. The whole thing that kind of keeps it together is for all our safety boats at the yacht club, we have an emergency action plan, which is a 2-sided document that has written procedures for calling 911 on one side, and on the other side has a chart and the locations where we're most likely to be able to identify, or the key points of the harbor, including Yee Yacht Yard, the breakwater, the end of the channel, A mark, and F for Frost Point. So what we did was we made a drill that would have incidents happen at each one of those key points, And to help us in the communication, we labeled the boats that were involved, the safety boats that the yacht club uses, in those same designations. So we had Whaler F, Whaler A, Whaler B, Whaler C, Whaler D. So that way we get used to calling and communicating with the police and fire, identifying the whaler by its number, because that's one of the big confusion points is when you get a big incident like this, it's confusing to figure out who's talking to who. So this helps. In this drill, there's about 5 or 6 different VHF frequencies going on that have to be coordinated, and that's part of the fun as well. Our back chart also gets kept on the boat for later so that the instructors, the police, everyone who knows where the drill is, know the key points and how to identify them. The Latin long is there and their description, so that kind of helps. So we fold our emergency action plan document into the drill, and we start out at Frost Point with a simulated propeller strike, which our instructors activate a 911 system, whatever that is for the town of Fairfield. They do their end, and they start doing that, which forces the fire department to set up a command center at the Yee Yacht Yard. From there, they deploy the fire boats and the police boats, and they rendezvous out there, and they first engage in this simulated propeller strike, which is buoy number 1, this young guy. And then as they're sorry, I'm running out of time here. I'll try to speed up. As they're recovering that, then the other incidents happen at 4 other points simultaneously, which causes confusion and communication and recovery of all these buoys. They all meet together. They get them back to Yee Yacht Yard where AMR can take the buoys away. And then we have a debriefing on the either Yee Yacht Yard or at the club, depending on the weather. And we're able to all go over our roles and clear some stuff up. It's been a very effective drill. We're able to build on it every season and learn that little things out there happen, like a radio might fail or an engine might pick up some seaweed, so you have to tow boat. It's as close to real world as we can get, and each year we can enhance it in a different way. Certain years we'll have the instructor fire a flare if we feel that we need to do that. We usually have our younger junior instructors have a key role there, and then have the senior instructors also help, but we also make them involved in the beginning and let them know what's coming and let them add to the drill. So everybody kind of has a piece of the action, and we all walk away winners. If we're a safer harbor. The Yacht Club is committed to community safety, and throughout the season we do other things for safety, but this is the big beginning of the season, and it's been a very positive drill for both the Yacht Club, the harbor, the first responders. We all get to know each other, and there's a level of respect there that a lot of other harbors need to get. We've got other harbors and other organizations now looking at our drill to copy it, which is great. Whatever we have to do, I have a video on YouTube called Southport, Connecticut Safety Drill, if you want to look that up. Southport CT Safety Drill 2021 in Pursuit of Safety Excellence. It's a 2.5-minute video. Check it out and see what you think. So it's been my pleasure to report about our drill, and if anyone has any questions or would like to hear more about the drill, please feel free to email me or call me at the club. Thank you.
Wow, Jeff, that sounds terrific. Great effort. Commissioners, questions, comments for Mr. Engborg?
I think it's great that the Yacht Club does that to coordinate the whole town on safety. Right.
And how many police and firemen did you have, Jeff?
I'm not looking at the syllabus, but I can tell you we had at least 6 policemen and about 6 firemen and about 6 AMR people. And if I forgot anybody out there, please pardon me. The lieutenant from the fire department calls the shots from his angle. Everybody has their own discipline, and it works really well together. But the big deal is we try to overwhelm, because there's no way that somebody can find 10 buoys. Sometimes we hide one behind something, and it takes a little bit of extra time to find it. We try to mix it up. Nobody really knows what's going to happen in the drill. They have a script, but there's always that wild card, just like in real life. And it really promotes, I think, more of a community-spirited focus on what's really important, and that's safety. It's not junior program specific, but that's a high volume user of the harbor during this time of season. But we would definitely this gives us a good foundation for any sort of multiple or chaotic situation out there. So
yeah, great. Other commissioners, comments, questions? Okay, super, Jeff. Thank you so much for taking the time to report to us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Sure. Lower Wharf project, Mr. Stedman.
Kim, I couldn't hear you. This is Jeff. Did you want me to comment?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. I guess I was muted. Well, we have pending a decision by the Commission, the proposal by Race to obtain the permit again, which expired and cannot be renewed anymore. And that was for a cost, if I recall correctly, Kim, of $32,000. Right. And we were wondering if if it might be appropriate to consider maybe amending the work that we're looking for or wishing to permit. We were going to talk with the marina manager and also the town engineer who was on vacation last week, and we didn't get a chance to do that. But there's another consideration that came up just recently in the last few days, and I've been talking with Mr. Sternberg from Race about this on an ongoing basis, and he's kept us up to date on what's going on. But we have a relatively small amount of dredge material, and the issue has been, we're going over the same thing for months now at a time. We were not able to do the work with the grant from the Connecticut Port Authority because the material requires capping in Long Island Sound. And we tried to amend the permit to place the material in the Western Long Island Sound disposal site, which is closer, would be cheaper, and would not require capping. But we took some preliminary samples, and those samples were judged to not be of good quality. So the possibility of amending the permit to place it in Western Long Island Sound was not feasible. So now we're forced with it to consider whether to accept this $32,000 proposal, which is a lot because of the work that needs to be done to get the new permit. The additional testing and the survey work is a large part of that. However, as some of you may know, there's been for some years now an issue and a conflict between Connecticut and New York State concerning dredge material disposal in Long Island Sound. And as a result of certain agreements that were made when the Long Island Sound Dredge Material Management Plan was approved by the EPA and the Corps of Engineers, New York would have a role in reviewing proposals that were proposals for dredge material disposal in Long Island Sound. We were fortunate when we first got the permit that it preceded New York's involvement in this manner, so there was no requirement for New York to review it. And apparently what New York has done in the last few years is take as much time as possible to comment on these proposals and just delay them. Now, apparently, and I've asked Deep for some information on this and haven't heard back, New York is requiring that for material that's judged that needs to be capped, that the applicant has to do what's known as toxicity tests on the material. And those tests are extremely expensive. And so, for example, for our project, the additional, if we had to do those additional toxicity tests, it could cost us $30,000 to $50,000, which is, I don't know how you describe it, but not reasonable, not a reasonable amount of money to consider spending for this that amount of dredge material. But we still, of course, want to dredge the end of the boat ramp, excavate that, and remove that. If we didn't put that in Long Island Sound, we wouldn't have to worry about the toxicity tests. But that New York State requirement, and I've talked about this at some length with the Connecticut Port Authority, which had, before this additional cost was known, advised that they would recommend, the expense of getting the permit again, because the Port Authority has additional funds that are available for the Small Harbor Improvement Project grants, and it's reasonable to expect we could get additional funds to make up for the cost. But right now, I think we really have to revise our thinking about that. Of dredging that amount of money, if an additional $30,000 to $50,000 would be needed, that's a negative. On the positive side, with the amount of money available through the Small Harbor Improvement Project program authorized by the legislature for the next 5 years, I talked about this with the Port Authority. We should give some thought to what the cost would be for replacing the bulkhead at Perry Green, which is clearly a project that needs to be done because of the what do you want to call it, the sinkholes behind the collapse of the ground behind the bulkhead. So that's something that we're beginning to talk about with the town engineer, and what would be involved in how much it would cost to repair that bulkhead, replace it. And the Port Authority project manager suggested that if we want to add that, we should be thinking about all the projects for harbor improvement that we have in mind. And I'm sorry for talking so much, but that's my presentation on this. So we're going to have to talk with the town engineer, Mr. Hurley, now that he's back from vacation, with the marina manager. And I think we should be prepared to make a decision that we're not, especially if it's going to cost another $30,000 to $50,000, to forget about dredging that area from the boat ramp out to the channel. But that's my long-winded presentation.
That's certainly more positive, Jeff, than we've heard in a while. Commissioners, comments, questions for Jeff?
Excuse me for interrupting.
Yep, go ahead.
It's positive in terms of the funds that are now, that the Port Authority is now authorized to spend for these small harbor improvement projects, and the possibility that we could apply for funds for replacing the Perry Green bulkhead. Right. That's the most positive, and I think working with RACE that we can come up with some sort of a way to get that material out from the end of the boat launching ramp and put the last plank in, and the last plank that's in there now to adjust the slope of it. And we still have the work that we can do on the elevated piers at the lower wharf. At the lower wharf. Yeah, it just seems more and more that the problem that dredging that area from the boat ramp out to the channel is problematic.
One question I have, this is Harry.
Yep, Harry.
Is every harbor along the coast up against the same thing?
Yes, except for the federal projects, Harry. The federal government, the Corps of Engineers projects can override the New York State's objections. And as I understand it, that's one of the reasons why there haven't been a lot of dredging projects in the last year, that the state of New York is just taking as much time as it can, or that it's allowed to act on these projects, and as a result, there haven't been many projects. I also understand
basically to discourage.
Yeah, well, to discourage the applicant or to make them not happen. I mean, New York State's position for many years has been that Connecticut is polluting Long Island Sound by putting the dredge material in these open water disposal sites. Now, someone mentioned, might have been Mr. Sternberg, I think, because again he's been providing information regularly, that one of a marina in Connecticut has now filed some sort of legal action against this practice of New York State. I don't know. I've asked Deep to provide some information on that, but that's a development that I just learned about.
So except for the it sounds like except for the dredging project, we could proceed and with the blessing or the encouragement in any event of the Connecticut Port Authority to get done an awful lot of the work that we had only dreamed of and never thought would be possible because of the cost.
Yeah, because of the availability of more grant funds than were anticipated just a short time ago.
Right.
But of course, that's who knows what's going to happen. But that's the optimistic approach, optimistic perspective on this now, and especially that they've suggested that we look into the Perry Green bulkhead as a harbor infrastructure project. It's potentially fundable. I mean, I have no idea what it would cost to replace that, or what additional permitting may be needed, or engineering. But that's something that we said we would discuss with Mr. Hurley, the town engineer.
Right. So we had to meet with Mr. Hurley anyway to discuss the dredging and the possibility, the slim possibility that we might be able to de-water whatever it was we dredged at the boat ramp.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that will be an interesting meeting. Commissioners, any questions for Jeff about this?
And in fact, while I was going on and talking, Mr. Hurley called. So I'll talk with him later.
Okay. Commissioners, questions, thoughts?
I think it would be a great thing to get some of these other projects taken care of. Dredging seems to have been the hardest thing for us to accomplish.
Right.
And that goes back years.
Right.
Yeah. And our project, the federal project with the sandbar, that's not subject to New York approval because it's not considered as, open water disposal in Long Island Sound and the disposal sites. It's beneficial use in the nearshore area where we would disperse that, so we don't have that same issue. And anyway, the court can overrule New York State on their own projects.
Good. Questions, comments from anybody else? Okay, Jeff and Mark, the sand management project. We're meeting with the Corps.
Thanks. So, Kim, you mentioned the meeting we all attended.
Yep.
Jeff, I didn't get anything from that meeting that was a surprise. To me, that seemed to go as we expected. Is that correct? Would you care to characterize how that meeting went from your standpoint?
It was a positive meeting in that I think there were, how many people from the Corps of Engineers? Four. Right? The Chief of Navigation, Mr. Habel, Coral, and Todd, environmental guy. So they have a dredging plan now for restoring the 100-foot width of the channel, and now they're dealing with the Fish and Wildlife Service. Well, one thing that was interesting, Mark, is that they don't seem to be as concerned about the impact of the project on the plants. They seem to feel that even though that the channel would be widened, that the hydraulics or whatever you call it are such that the slope will be fairly steep, and that the plants will not be impacted. But the impact would be on the potential habitat for the piping plover. So they asked if we could provide the reports that the Connecticut Audubon prepared for us as the monitoring reports that we did after the DPW dredged it in 2014 and 2015, or excavated it, which I've done. And I've also contacted Mr. Bull, Miley Bull, from the Connecticut Audubon, who did the monitoring for us. And he of course is available to have a discussion with the Corps about what his observations are concerning the habitat. But we need to come up with a proposal for mitigating impact on the habitat, which means anything that was a fairly level surface now and would be cut away because of the side slope. That's removal of potential bird nesting habitat, and we have to compensate for that somehow. And
so
the other part.
So before you go further, so the Corps though generally guys who or the people who weigh so much the habitat impacts, right? So thinking about projects I've seen before in both New York and Connecticut, they defer to the other agencies, New York DEC and our state DEP, for impacts to the habitat, and the Corps of Engineers just has a different scope. Is that your view too?
Well, and the Fish and Wildlife Service, they have response to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service because the plover is an endangered federal species. That the plans have to be prepared to the satisfaction of the Fish and Wildlife Service, and so they were involved in our project again 5-6 years ago, and that was, we had an agreement at that time, a memorandum of agreement. It was between the Harbor Commission and the Country Club of Fairfield that called for the monitoring by a qualified expert, which was Connecticut Audubon, and also we had to place the string fencing around the habitat, and in order to compensate at the time for the level area that we were affecting, we had to provide additional level area and free sand or open sand area, and we did that by removing invasive non-native plants from the top of the sandbar to create more open habitat. But yeah, the Corps' well, it would apply to the Corps now, but for the town to get permission to do that, the permit had to include conditions that were specified by or agreed to by the Fish and Wildlife Service. So we'd have to do the same thing now, and that will involve, some on-site review so we're in the process of the environmental mitigation now. But the other issue that we have to proceed has to do with ownership, because we're first of all, the Corps needs access to its structure, the jetty and the wall, because they would be bringing equipment similar to what the town used to excavate sand. The Corps of Engineers has its own equipment in that regard, and they would be bringing that, and I guess the same way the town did, along the beach from the east, rather than on the Corps, or rather than on the club's entrance road. But they would also need to be able to stockpile that material. They would excavate it from the sandbar, stockpile it, and then place it into the dredge, which would abut up next to the shore, and then the dredge would go a short distance offshore and disperse the material over the area that we hope to improve as oyster habitat. So there needs to be an easement agreement between the federal government and the country club to allow that work. And then we also the Corps' real estate department will make a determination of who actually owns the sandbar that they would be excavating. Because that, any sort of DEP approval, when someone wants to do work, they have to attest to the ownership of the area that they're going to work on. So that's another issue or matter that we're working on, and I believe Kim has reached out to the country club to start the dialogue necessary for us to all work together to get that 100-foot channel dredged.
Right.
Yeah, it's been a long time since it's been 100-foot wide.
Yeah. No, it was in 1960, I think, Harry, is when you look at the old photos. That was when there was no sandbar on the west side of that of the jetty.
Yeah.
And then
yeah.
So it's 60 years.
Wow. But again, it feels like things are moving along.
Yeah, yes, because they're clearly working on this, and with a team of personnel from the Army Corps of Engineers to do this project. They're not just talking with us on the phone; they're producing the analyses and the engineered drawings, and now the environmental mitigation component of it.
Right. Very exciting. And the money for this?
It's a big step forward.
It is. And the money for this, Jeff?
Yes. Well, of course, that's another thing. And the Connecticut, gosh, I'm sorry to keep talking like this. The Connecticut Port Authority, we hope, will be a potential source of funds, and that's the way that one of the purposes of the Port Authority, or programs that the Port Authority was supposed to continue when the DOT's Maritime Division was eliminated, was as a source of funds for federal dredging projects where the likelihood of getting funds from the federal government is not much. And so the Port Authority knows this, and we're working on. They have to set up, with the amount of money that they're authorized to spend. They now have to set up the programs for allocating funds for infrastructure projects to the small harbors, and also funds for the smaller federal dredging projects. So Mr. Salvatore from the Port Authority said that that's one of their priorities, to set up a program where we could go to for funds. Now the other thing that's good about this is that the Corps of Engineers own dredge and own equipment would be doing this. So we're only paying for the cost of operating the dredge and operating the equipment. We're not paying a contractor's, additional contractor's profit margin, if that's what you call it.
Yeah.
We've got to get the permits and get close to getting the permits before we can seek money from the state of Connecticut to do this.
Okay. And they, am I correct that they do not yet have the procedures set up for applications for that money?
That's correct.
Okay. So as long as we keep moving ahead with the Corps and, frankly, with the lower wharf, we're not missing out on anything as we move ahead.
And again, I don't know how much how much this might cost, but for comparison purposes, when the Port Authority took over from the DOT, this program that was managed for federal dredging projects by the Connecticut DOT, they provided $10 million for the project to dredge the Housatonic River and move sand to Hammonasset Beach for beach nourishment, and it was over $3 million, I believe, to dredge the Cos Cob Harbor in Greenwich. Here we're talking about, of course, much less money. I don't know the total volume of the sand that would be excavated, but for comparison purposes, they had also, the DOT had funded the operation of this same Corps of Engineers dredge in the Housatonic River right after Storm Sandy. And I believe that the volume of material that was excavated there was about 60,000 cubic yards. And that was, the dispersal area was a significant distance away from the channel in the Housatonic River. And I believe they allocated $750,000 for that job, which would be substantially more than what we're talking about here, in terms of volume, and although there's the excavation part of this on land stuff too, but we'll keep working on this, and we were putting together a presentation, a slide presentation on the history of the channel and our work to do this, which we'll share with everybody, which was part of background information that we're sharing with the Corps of Engineers about the history of the channel, the history of the dredging efforts, and why this channel is one of the most significant federal navigation projects in U.S. history, because it was one of the first. So that I'll stop in a second, but when you look at the history of the Southport Harbor Channel, the wall, the jetty, we learn not just about Southport, but the whole history of navigation improvements in the United States, and how they begin with a congressional act and then move forward to local implementation. But anyway, that presentation will be shared with everybody soon.
Wonderful. Really, two very positive reports. That's great. That's really great. Commissioners, any comments, questions for Mark or Jeff?
It's great that things are moving along.
It sure feels good, doesn't it, Harry?
Yes.
Feels good.
Yes.
It really does. Okay, anybody else? All righty, mooring committee, Mr. Hirschler.
Yes, Kim. The mooring committee met on July 12th. At that meeting, Kim and Harry, Jeff Stedman, and I attended. Jeff Engborg attended, representing Pequot Yacht Club's role supporting our moorings. At that time, of course, the harbor master position was vacant, so it was a meeting without a harbor master. The committee discussed the limited actions that the commission can take regarding mooring management to compensate for the absence of an appointed harbor master for Southport Harbor, and we concluded that in the limited cases where the harbor master had decided previously where to place vessels for the 21 season, but the permit sticker had not yet been mailed because there was an outstanding document requirement. Once that document requirement had been satisfied, we felt we could have the chair send the sticker to those individuals who had finally satisfied their requirements to be placed in the position that the harbor master had already decided to place them for 2021. We did discuss complaints, as Kim mentioned earlier, by a few boaters out of the 130 or so in the harbor who claimed they couldn't access their online mooring records to add those images that should have been put into the system last winter. And Kim reported that she had sent these boaters an email with instructions on how to access their online mooring permit applications, and I reported that I had spoken to Brad Hurley, who's the head of online mooring. He investigated these claims of problems getting into the system, and he reported that he verified the system's working properly, and if the users would enter either their email address as they put in previously into the system or their phone number that they had put previously into the system, then the system would give them access to their own records in the system. So we believe that this is a user problem and not a systems problem. Finally, the committee discussed the status of the Harbor Master Patrol boat and the donation. Kim reported we're still pending review by the town of Fairfield. Hopefully we'll get an answer on that by the end of this week, but to date we have not received an answer. Finally, there were a few cases of still outstanding unissued permits for the current season because of lack of current proof of registration or insurance or both. And Jeff Engborg kindly has been following up with those boaters who are Pequot Yacht Club members to help get those discrepancies resolved so those people can receive their permits and be allowed to have their boats in the harbor finally for this year. The meeting adjourned at 4:30. That's my report.
Any questions for Jack? Thank you, Jack. Any questions? Super. Okay. Thanks, Jack. The Harbor Management Plan update, the committee met very briefly just to review the final version of the report of the survey, which I think I let all the commissioners know that it was when it was available. It's posted on our website. Jeff did a terrific job, and the committee had some really good suggestions, and I think it looks terrific. So we contacted many of the groups that had publicized the availability of the survey to let them know that now the results were available. So hopefully those almost 400 folks who responded know that the results are available and have taken a look at them. So that's the plan update. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I hope everyone has taken a look at the survey, and we really need to applaud Jeff for his efforts to organize the data and make it in such a readable format. Questions, comments?
Now we have to make the changes to the plan. So
right.
That's our job.
Right. That's coming up next, for sure.
which we've already started, but
we've started. We're two or three chapters into it, so we're about almost halfway done. So we're in pretty good shape there too. So that work will resume in the fall sometime. Rules and procedures, Jack?
I think as you previously reported, Kim, the real news on that front, having approved the new rules and procedures, is the corresponding changes to the Town Code Chapter 24. As you mentioned previously, on June 21st, you and Jeff Stedman and I appeared virtually before the Representative Town Meetings Law and Administration Committee, and at their request, we walked through each of the language changes that the Commission is proposing that the RTM adopt as changes to Chapter 24, which would have the beneficial effect of ensuring that the language in the Harbor Management Plan, the rules and procedures that support that Harbor Management Plan, and Chapter 24 of the Town Code, the Harbor Management section of the Town Code, are well aligned. And I think that meeting went well. Our understanding is that the full RTM at an upcoming meeting will review the same proposal, perhaps at two separate meetings. I'm not clear on that. And then the RTM will ultimately vote whether to approve the recommended changes to Chapter 24. I don't know, Kim or Jeff, if you have any other thoughts on that.
No, you're right. It was unclear when we would, when the RTM would meet to consider those proposed changes, because they also often do not meet in July and August. So I believe they met in July, but it had to, as I recall, it had to be on their agenda for 2 months through 2 meetings. So I guess the earliest that we could expect any kind of action would be at their August meeting. Any questions for Jack? Any comments, thoughts? Okay, 1101 Harbor Road. Jeff, you're going to have to help me with this. But when the town bought the lower wharf, there were a number of restrictions in the deeds to that property. And when the town agreed with the owner of 1101, Harbor Road, to acquire that property, at some point in the proceedings, the request was made to the Harbor Management Commission to manage that property, and the commission responded to the town with a letter which asked several questions about basically what do you mean when you say manage that property, and what kinds of rules are we being expected to consider, and we made this request of a few town officials, and we never got a response to that letter. And then on a couple of weeks ago, Betty Gabriel got a phone call, as I mentioned earlier, from the attorney representing the owner, requesting that the commission put signs up that would enforce the rules, and make sure that the restrictions in the deeds were being followed. The Parks and Rec Department generously agreed that they would help us, but the questions that we raised, was it 2 years ago, Jeff, has still not been answered. So I'm not quite sure what we will, how or whether we will, or how we will proceed.
Yeah. We have, of course, the letter that we wrote, but we spent a lot of time on that, and I believe we of course have the letters. I should have had them called up Kim, before we started talking.
I should have done that too.
But the last letter we wrote was that presuming that the town attorney answered the questions that we had raised, and that our understanding of those questions was correct, then the commission had, forget whether it was either no objection or found that the proposed, in effect, land swap was consistent with the harbor management plan. But at that time, we were informed that it was likely that management responsibility would be transferred to the Harbor Commission, since the Commission has management responsibilities for the lower wharf. And we asked that, we asked for information as to what that responsibility for this property that we would then, assume management of, what we would have to do, or but we never heard back after that. So I guess what we'll have to do is talk to Parks and Rec and the town attorney and see exactly what was agreed when that land swap took place. But the main thing that we did, it had to be reviewed by the Harbor Commission, the proposed, abandonment of the easement and transferring that beach area. We presuming certain conditions were met, we were okay with it. But that was the end of it. Once that town TP&Z never responded, and neither did the town attorney at the time.
Right, and one of the questions was, I think, whether or not whether there had to be any kind of handicap accessibility.
Yeah.
I think the other question was some of the easements, whether all of the easements continue in place, or whether some of them, for some other reasons, might have been extinguished. Yeah. So that but the request that Betty got was accompanied by several pictures that showed dog walkers not on public property, dogs no one cleaning up after dogs. Several pictures of kind of misbehavior down there, and I think that's what spurred the letter.
Well, here it is. It was the last letter that we wrote was April 8th, 2019, and the commission, Harbor Commission at that time, we had a number of meetings, and that it was the consensus of the commission to submit a favorable recommendation concerning the proposal, which was the swap, provided that all questions raised by the commission in its March 12th letter to the applicant's engineer are addressed to the satisfaction of the town attorney, including whether court approval would be required concerning the proposed elimination of the public access easement, and whether the shore protection structures proposed to be transferred to the town as part of the reconfigured property are properly permitted. 2, provisions from the original easement agreement are retained, including but not limited to the provision limiting future structures on the water lot, which the area was known as. 3, that a smaller wall that does not interfere with public views be considered. 4, that all necessary ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, requirements be adhered to, including requirements relative to the proposed stairs that would provide access to the shore from the lower wharf. And 5, that the commission, here it is, 5, that the commission's role for management of the property, should it be accepted by the town, be defined. We presume that the commission will have an opportunity to discuss that role prior to any decision by the town to accept the property. That never happened.
Right.
So I don't even know if in the acceptance of the property that the jurisdiction was formally, oversight was formally transferred to the Harbor Commission.
Right.
So we'll have to learn from the town attorney, I guess, Kim.
What the next step would be.
Yeah.
I believe that the reason that Betty got the call was that the former conservation director had conversations with Mr. Fallon about that property. So I think that was the reason why he gave Betty a call. So But you're right. The commission, we never heard anything. We never got any response. So, questions, folks? Anybody have a question? Okay, on to new business. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Harry.
I guess we're just going to have to wait for clarification to make sure that if it was accepted, what's going to happen.
Right, because the other question that what signs are we supposed to put up? Signs about what?
And what's the process for doing that and determining what rules there might be that would apply, that the signs would depict or display.
Right.
And to do that, does the commission have to hold a public hearing to adopt rules for the use of that new property, or apply existing rules for the lower wharf? I don't know.
And even the temporary signs that we put up, within a week they were down.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, the no swimming, no jumping off the lower wharf dock there, which I don't know if anybody has seen it, but I got a couple of pictures from folks with, there was a couple of young folks jumping off the pier as motorboats were approaching, and there were parents taking pictures. So apparently the jumpers at high tide have not gone away. So that's pretty scary.
Yeah, it's an accident waiting to happen.
Sure is. So. And of course we can call
who would become responsible? Would the town be responsible?
I don't know. I thought there were signs that were posted over at Yee Yacht Yard, and that there was one that was put up sort of on that along right as you enter the lower wharf, and that along the wall there that's kind of closest to Yee Yacht Yard. But I haven't been down there this summer to take a look.
Yeah. I know they have the fence, if you will, blocking half of the street.
Right.
Telling you to turn around.
Right.
I'll have to go down there and look and see what the signs are.
See if the sign. That would be great, Harry. See if the signs are the no jumping, no swimming signs are still up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll take care of that.
That would be great. Okay. New business. The harbor master search. Specifically on the search committee has met twice. We have put together a job description. The job description we expect will be posted on our website shortly. And we're hoping that the first select woman will publicize the vacancy and so that folks know that there is a vacancy. Who are not already in tune with what's going on will hear about it. And once we get some response to the job description, the search committee will interview candidates. Just as a summary, the commission provides the names of candidates to the governor. We will not be selecting the harbor master. And Jeff has discovered that there is a new law in place which allows us to provide only one name if we have only one qualified candidate. In the past, we were required to provide the governor with 3 names. So maybe this search will be easier, but hopefully we'll have lots of qualified candidates. So I'm hoping that we will have names to the governor by the end of August. But I think anything more quickly than that is pretty unrealistic at this point. So, and we did discuss the question of an interim harbor master. Jeff has been in touch with folks in the governor's office. And Jeff, why don't I let you could briefly describe what we found out about appointing an interim harbor master.
Well, okay. Well, we can't appoint the interim harbor master. It would have to be a governor's appointment. And the governor's council was not comfortable in thinking that the governor had the authority to do that under the current statutes, because the statutes specify that the governor will appoint the harbor master for a period of 3 years, or for a 3-year term, or to complete the term of someone who's retiring or not there anymore. So the suggestion was that if we thought that we had someone who might want to serve on an interim basis, that the governor might appoint that person as the deputy harbor master. And then when we had the person that would be interested in the full-time, the 3-year term of the harbor master, then that person could be appointed as the harbor master, rather than appointing someone as because the governor is going to have to appoint whoever he appoints. We've learned for a 3-year term. So he thought that the best way, if we wanted someone on a short-term basis, to do it as a deputy who could then step down or not do anything for 3 years, but while we look for the harbor master to be the full-time harbor master. So I guess we decided to forego the interim route or the deputy idea and search for someone who would be harbor master on a full-time basis, or for the full 3 years.
Thank you.
Sort of confusing, but he didn't think he had the authority to appoint someone on an interim basis.
Right. So we have proceeded with our search efforts, but not with our efforts to find a deputy who would then become who would not be required to do any work after the full harbor master was appointed. It just gets too confusing.
It gets too confusing. I think.
And just detracts from our efforts to find the harbor master at this point. So, questions, commissioners? Thoughts?
It would almost seem that interim, or however you want to name it, Justin Cathcart would be the most likely candidate if anyone was going to do it on a limited basis.
He, well, the difficulty is that he already works for the town, and
right.
I don't know if that would create any difficulties for him. And he, the town rules are a little bit different than our rules. So I believe that he had expressed some interest to Ed a couple of months ago, but I don't. And he was going to talk with his management, but we've never. I've never heard from him. I don't know if anybody else ever has, but I've never heard from him about that position. So,
can you forward me the actual listing for the job so that I can post it at Black Rock Yacht Club?
I don't have it. It's in the hands of the town.
All right, so I can just download it from the town website when it's up?
Right, or you could simply put up a notice that says this is how you get to it.
Oh, okay.
With the link
Okay.
to our website. I'm hopeful that that will be up tomorrow or Thursday. The job posting.
Okay.
That is.
All right, I'll check
Questions,
into
anyone? Yep. Questions, thoughts? Okay, on to Mr. Owens' Rule 23 request that the Commission find that the Harbor Master's denial of a priority mooring permit was contrary to law, and that Mr. Owens, as a waterfront property owner, is entitled to a mooring permit. So let me just recap just briefly how it is that we're here and what Rule 23 is. Rule 23 of our Rules and Procedures requires the Commission within 30 days, within 60 days of a request that we review a decision of the Harbor Master to take up that matter at our meeting. Mr. Owens' request came in on June 17th, and if we postpone this till our August meeting, that would be the 61st day. So we're required, and since this is the first meeting, since receiving that letter, we either consider the Harbor Master's decision in light of our rules and procedures this evening, or we have to have a special meeting going forward. If we turn to Mr. Casey's letter of June 17th, he makes a lot of, asserts a lot of claims that we have discriminated against Mr. Owens in a variety of ways over a period of time. And we are not here this evening to consider the United States Constitution or any other legal treatises or decisions other than whether the Harbor Master's decision was in line with our own rules. And if we just review very briefly what our rules are, they require anyone, whether they're a waterfront property owner or not, to put their name on the waiting list, and only people from the waiting list are entitled to a mooring in Southport Harbor. If you put your name on the waiting list with the online mooring system, it's got a box that you can check that says that you're a littoral property owner, and that gives the Harbor Master the information that he then uses to consider the rest of our rules, which include whether or not you have a dock that would be suitable for your boat. That's part of our rules, and that's also in the Harbor Management Plan. In this case, I believe that this is the first time that Mr. Owens has put his name on the waiting list. In the past, he has applied for a mooring, but has not put his name on the waiting list. It is also true that the former owner of 789 Harbor Road and many other waterfront property owners acquired their moorings prior to becoming waterfront property owners by putting their name on the waiting list and waiting for their turn. Nonetheless, Mr. Owens is certainly entitled to assert that he is entitled to a mooring, even though he has a dock, and it is the responsibility of the Harbor Master under our rules to consider all of the circumstances, including the size of the boat, the location of the dock, when making his decision about whether or not to allow the waterfront property owner to go to the head of the list and receive a mooring ahead of the folks on the waiting list. In this case, in May, as you'll recall, the harbor master concluded that Mr. Owens' dock was sufficient for him to access the harbor and for him to keep his boat. We found from Mr. Casey's letter of July 13th that in 2011, when the prior owner of 789 Harbor Road was doing a significant amount of construction, that the chair of this commission at that time included, among a number of conditions granting the okay for the work to proceed, that the purpose of that dock was to be for loading and unloading a mooring from a mooring. And of course, at that time, Mr. Hall, who was the owner, had the mooring that he had received before he became the waterfront property owner. In addition to that, in his letter of July 13th, Mr. Casey included the link to the Army Corps of Engineers survey of the bottom, showing the depths of Southport Harbor, specifically referencing the water, the depth of the water at the northern end of the dock, which at mean low water is about 3 to 4 inches. And Mr. Casey is now suggesting to us that that is insufficient for providing Mr. Owens with access to the water, and that during the year that he kept the boat there, that the outboard had to be tilted up because it was in mud. So that's where we stand, Commissioners. It's our job this evening to decide whether we believe that the harbor master acted contrary to our rules and procedures by denying Mr. Owens the priority mooring permit. And I think that's the first order of business. And the second order of business would be if we have any thoughts or conclusions related to the November 21 letter from this commission with when Mary Von Conta was the chair, or the July 13, 2021 letter from Mr. Casey to us. So first, I'd like to hear from the commissioners, and then we can hear from Mr. Casey. So, commissioners, what are your thoughts?
Okay, this is Mark. I'll maybe I can get some discussion going. So it looks like looking at the Robinson Cole letter, just without referring to any particular words in it, it appears to be saying that the harbor master's connection of the presence of the dock to the eligibility for what's called a priority mooring, that connection is only in the harbor master's mind. It doesn't exist. What is the rebuttal to that contention? Can someone help me with that?
Well, our rules say that the harbor master is entitled to consider. The rules say that a littoral property owner is entitled to a dock and or a mooring, not a dock and a mooring.
Madam Chair, this is John Casey. Can Can you hear me?
Please, Mr. Casey, please. I'd like to have the commissioners speak first, and then we will entertain your arguments.
Okay, I just was going to respond to Mr. Foster's question.
I just assumed we have the commissioners air their thoughts first.
So of course, Mr. Stedman is quite knowledgeable of the harbor management plan and all the backgrounds. I wonder if Jeff, you can help me with this. I mean, the harbor master, I'm sure, has a broad mandate, or at least a broad role of weighing the various interests in the harbor and making his decisions. Is that the connection that the harbor master would have applied in this case, since the harbor master is not on the call to answer this? I'm just. You go ahead.
I can just make my opinions or my comments on this. So it's for what they're worth. So my understanding is that the harbor master felt that the dock provided reasonable access. And now we've heard assertions by the applicant that the littoral rights include the right to a mooring and a dock. And I don't think we should ever agree to that, because the understanding of littoral rights and the way it's considered in decisions by DEEP to issue permits is that littoral rights are a right. It's a right of reasonable access. It does, and then the question is, what's reasonable access? And I don't believe that whatever decision you may make on this mooring permit application, and again, you can't direct the harbor master to issue the permit. When the new harbor master takes office, we can transmit these discussions to him or her, but the harbor master has an independent decision on this. This is a state official. But my feeling is that you don't want to accept the assertion that the littoral rights guarantees a right to a mooring and a dock, and you don't want to accept the assertion that reasonable access is access at all stages of the tide. That's not consistent with the way that with DEEP applies the public trust doctrine and applies the understanding of littoral rights in making permitting decisions. There are plenty of instances where docks are permitted and are used for many years, and they don't provide access at low tide. And that's we've got the other consideration that there are the spaces for moorings are, and we've talked about this on and on and on. The spaces for moorings are very limited in Southport Harbor. It's a federal anchorage. We've got the requirement in the harbor management plan to provide space for the general public, and that's what we've tried to do. And now there's assertions have been made. I'm sort of getting tired of talking about this too, but assertions are made that other property owners have docks and moorings, and that this property owner this applicant is somehow been singled out and treated unfairly, and that's just not right. Because the commission was experienced in this instance a complicated ownership situation that's different than any other ownership situation that the harbor master was responding to. We heard at times that the applicant is the owner of the property, that he's the property manager for the ownership entity, and that he has ownership rights. So it's reasonable that the harbor master would ask questions about that. It's also the assertion that other property owners have both docks and moorings. Those situations, I think there are 7 other ones. I can't remember exactly, but we looked at them, and they all evolved differently over time, different circumstances. And I have to go back and double check this, but the letter that was referred to, former Chairman Von Conter wrote that letter, and that's when a former owner of this property applied for other work at this property, and it was a very interesting and somewhat I don't want to say difficult, but permit review, because we found out in the course of it that the foundation of the house is connected, but it's one stone wall connected with the arch over Horse Tavern Creek, which is a town road. So that had to be considered into it, and the statement in that letter that the dock would be used for access to a boat at a mooring, that was with respect, if I recall, to a boat that was almost 50 feet long. So that property owner, again, if I recall correctly, and we can double check it, initially obtained a mooring permit through the waiting list when that person didn't own waterfront property, and then later switched essentially the permit to apply to a larger boat, which clearly wasn't a vessel, and the applicant made that assertion in the permit application that the dock would be used for access to the larger boat moored in the harbor. But my main things, Mark, are that you just, again, that for whatever it means, that you can't accept the assertion that the littoral rights guarantees a mooring and a dock, or that reasonable access is access at all stages of the tide. That has major ramifications for impacts on public interests and public uses of the public trust area. But anyway, I'm sorry to be going on about that. And it's also not correct to think that, or to imply that somehow this applicant was targeted or singled out for some sort of unusual or unfair treatment. Because I don't want to say any more than that, but all of the hours and the years that the Harbor Commission has spent working on these rules and procedures in an effort to be fair and to create a balance between property owners' rights of access and the public's rights. It's just not right to say that this applicant was singled out. We'll go through this and make a decision, but well, anyway, that's all I have to say.
Thanks. So to my question about the harbor master's connection of the presence of a dock to the mooring assignments, often called, I guess, mooring location. There's the phrase that's used a lot to the rules. The harbor masters appears to me to have wide powers in order to apply judgment, his judgment, his or her judgment, in making his determinations. In this case, considering reasonable access to the harbor. Is that generally true?
Yes, because the harbor master is responsible for safe and efficient operation, but also responsible for conducting his or her duties consistent with the harbor management plan and with the rules and with the rules and procedures. And remember that the basic principle in the plan is one dock and or mooring. And of course that wasn't left to the discretion of the applicant. It was a judgment call that would be made based on the specifics of the particular property. Now there are properties upstream in the harbor that have docks. They're not operable at all stages of the tide. You take the premise that, or the assertion that they should have 24-hour access, then what? Everybody then would have the right to dredge a channel to the middle of the harbor, or to have a mooring someplace else in the federal anchorage. It's a difficult issue, but the harbor master felt that the dock provided reasonable access in his judgment, and it was and felt that the request for a priority mooring then would be denied, because that would giving a priority mooring to a person that already had a dock that provided reasonable access would take away the opportunity for someone who's been on the waiting list for many years to obtain a mooring. That was his judgment.
It's Jack. I have a quick question. So our attention was drawn to the mean low water level at the north end of the applicant's dock. What's the range of the tide in Southport Harbor? I mean, so we're focusing on the moment of the lowest tide, but how much does the tide change in the tide cycle?
I would ask Mr. Engborg to be the expert on that. I mean, I can look in the book and see. But
it's not a
for discussion, guys. It's something around 6 feet.
6 feet.
It varies pretty widely with the moon and the astronomic forces.
Right. So, for the commissioners to think about, the question here is, to Jeff's point, there may be a moment during the day where there are several inches at the lowest point at the north end of the applicant's dock, but at some other point in the tide cycle, there could be multiple feet of depth at that lowest point, if I'm hearing correctly.
Right.
And the applicant is applying for a modest-sized powerboat to be on his dock. Actually, to be on a mooring instead of on his dock.
Right next to him is the property of Hugh Smith. His boat is what, probably 37, 38, maybe 40 feet, and he has no issues. And also, right next to him is the Levinson dock, which has, I think, a 50-foot sailboat, which also has no issues.
I believe Mr. Smith received his mooring when he lived up on Greenfield Hill, and then that was a mooring assigned in what became the federal anchorage, and it was grandfathered when the harbor management plan was adopted, and then forget when he bought his house and moved there, and that's how he ended up with a mooring and a dock.
And a dock.
Right, and Mr. Levinson,
but it was done legally.
Yeah, who's next door was not a waterfront property owner when he acquired his mooring either.
Right. So Mr. Hall was not a waterfront property owner when he got his mooring. Mr. Levinson wasn't either. So we haven't.
Nor was
nobody
Mr.
Smith. Who's been named here who didn't have a mooring through a different course than this applicant.
Right.
Well, one thing, if I might I'm sorry to keep talking so much. I wish there were in-person meetings. I could know whether I should stop talking. But this is the first meeting since we received that request that we've had a chance to discuss it. And now, because of the time period that when we received this was right before the last meeting, so we weren't able to put it on the agenda for the last meeting. I think one consideration might be to have this discussion today, and then have a special meeting within the 60 days to make a decision on this. That's one thing to consider. I don't know that you want to do that, but this is our first chance as a commission. Your first chance as a commission to discuss this most recent request, and we still haven't heard from the applicant's representative.
I would be interested in hearing from the applicant about what portion of the entire tide cycle does the applicant believe he should have ready access from his dock to not be eligible to jump in front of 72 other people on the waiting list.
Okay, Mr. Casey, would you like to answer that question for us?
Yes, I would. And for the record, my name is John Casey. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Robinson & Cole. We represent 789 Harbor Road, LLC, and Tom Owens in this matter. As Jeff said, it's too bad we're not in person. It'd probably be easier to just have this discussion. But so let me start with this. In my experience, and I've been doing dock permitting for over 15 years, the DEP will authorize a dock at a house with the specific understanding that it will not accommodate most vessels 24 hours a day, which means that the waterfront property owner will also require a mooring in order to have a vessel and a dock. And the dock, as this commission determined 10 years ago, would be used basically for onloading and offloading passengers at higher tides. And then at lower tides, you might have a dinghy or an inflatable that could get you out to your mooring. But with no intention that you would bring most boats into the dock at high tide. I disagree with Jeff regarding what your access rights are. As a waterfront property owner, the courts have said consistently that you have a right to access the water, and that's all the time. The way DEP interprets it is that it can be a combination. You don't have full access from your dock, but you have a combination of methods in order to get to and from your property from the water, which is a dock, which may be just a dinghy dock, out to a mooring. That way you can get to and from the water basically at all times, except maybe the lowest of low tides when you can't get a dinghy out to your mooring. And that's the setup that we have, and that's up and down the coast. And it's worked. People, believe me, would love to have bigger docks that go out further, docks that can accommodate 50-foot sailboats, but that's not what's permitted by DEP. So I just want to be clear. I've actually never run across this problem before. I've never had a property owner, after having obtained a dock permit, be denied a mooring permit. And your harbor management plan talks about giving a priority to waterfront property owners. It's as they say in Property Law 101, part of the bundle of sticks that you own when you own property. When you own waterfront property, you have that access to the shore. That's one of the sticks in your bundle. I think this may be frustrating for all of us because it's so unusual. So with that in mind, I'm going to kind of start at the end and address my letter from last week, because
well, I'm sorry, before you do that, Mr. Casey, could you, I think Jack had a question.
I think I heard if I'm hearing correctly, your position is that the applicant should have access 24 hours a day to the water, and if he can't have it from his dock, then we are obligated to also give him a mooring. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yes, that is the way it works along the entire shore of Connecticut for waterfront property owners. If they both
if I heard you correctly, you said that's not your understanding.
I didn't. This is the problem with being on the phone. My position is that the property at 789 Harbor Road should, through a combination of its dock and a mooring, have nearly 24-hour access, given that on some low tides, spring tides, full moon tides, there might be no water around the dock, so you can't even get a dinghy in or out. So that's my position, that there is a combination. That what's the point of having a waterfront property and then a dock permitted by DEP that sits in the mud or only gives you 2 or 3 or 4 inches of water at low tide for 2 hours, or 2 hours on either side of the low tide, so you can't get out into the water. That's the whole point of having waterfront property. So, as I said, every client I can think of in areas, especially on the western end of the Sound, where, as Mr. Emborg said, the tide range is very high, and if you're up some of these coves, your dock is in mud. What they have, and you can't bring a boat up to it, what they have is a combination of a mooring and and a dock. So my answer is that this commission, and the harbor master should, to the extent practical and reasonable, provide a mooring for a property front owner, especially when the harbor management plan says that they should have a priority to moorings over non-waterfront property owners. So that being said,
the example that Mr. Stedman used of property owners further upstream, perhaps either above the Tide Mill Bridge or below the Tide Mill Bridge, where there's mud but they have waterfront property and higher tides, we should be giving priority moorings in front of the 72 people on the waiting list for those people as well. Sounds like, to be consistent, we should be doing that, correct?
Well, no, because your harbor management plan doesn't cover the area north of what I think you call your North Anchorage.
It does. It goes up.
My understanding is
Tide Mill Dam.
Yep.
Jack, I'm just going to, sorry to interrupt. I'm looking at an aerial photo now of the area upstream of the Pequot Yacht Club. And I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 docks. And they look like all of them sit on the bottom at low tide. None of those property owners, they're all littoral property owners, as I'm aware of, have moorings in the harbor.
Correct.
So if you take this argument that a littoral property owner has 24-hour access, then do they retain someone to represent them and say that we have a right to a mooring in the public anchorage downstream in order to have 24 hour? Those people clearly don't have 24-hour access.
If I may, I would still say if the limitation is based on the permit for the dock granted by DEP, that's an issue between the property owner and DEP. That the property owner should also have a mooring is an issue between the property owner and the harbor master or the Harbor Management Commission. So you could give them a mooring and they could have a dock, but just because of nature and tides, they may not be able to get from their dock to their mooring at all tides, at all times of the day. That's a situation that is based on the topography and the depth of the water. And that changes from property to property. I don't see why that should prohibit a waterfront property owner from having a mooring.
Right. And just to be clear, we're not talking about whether they can have a mooring. We're asking them, the question is whether they should have a mooring prior to the 72 people on the waiting list already. So they would be entitled. Your client can get on our waiting list. In fact, he's on the waiting list currently. But the question is whether he is entitled to jump the line of people who've been waiting for a decade or more.
All I would ask that Mr. Owens be given is the same consideration that other waterfront property owners were given. And so to the extent that you've ever issued a priority mooring to a waterfront property owner, then I think Mr. Owens should be treated the same and given a priority mooring. That's a provision in your harbor management plan, which allows you to, or the harbor master, and the harbor master has to act in accordance with your harbor management plan to let waterfront property owners jump the line, so to speak. And so that's why I think if he's deserving of a mooring and it's consistent with your harbor management plan, and that's the practice of the harbor master and the commission in the past, then it would be unfair not to treat him in the same way. So as I said, going to my most recent letter, what the harbor master said in his most recent denial, and it is what it is. This is what he said. That a dock suitable for berthing a vessel of substantial size has been constructed at 789 Harbor Road property and has been used to accommodate your vessel. So that's the basis, and he didn't base that on your new rules. He based that on the 2015 rules, which were in effect, and we can argue whether the rules were appropriately approved by the state so that they are part of your harbor management plan. But for the sake of argument, saying that those rules are applicable, there's two arguments, and I trust you've all read my letter. One, if you had to amend your rules to specifically say that the harbor master can take into consideration whether a dock accommodates a boat, then I would think that means your old rules didn't have that provision. So he shouldn't have even been looking at whether the dock accommodates the boat. He should have just been looking at the harbor management plan, which says priority moorings can be granted to waterfront property owners. But let's even just consider whether the dock accommodates a boat. I don't know, and I don't know how, or I don't know why you would back off what your commission determined 10 years ago, as I wrote in my letter, prior to 10 years of additional siltation, that this dock was appropriate for loading and unloading passengers. It's definitely not suitable for berthing a vessel of substantial size. You have a survey by the Army Corps, less than a year old, which shows 4 to 5 inches of water around this dock at mean lower low tide, which means the lowest tide of each day. That's not the lowest tide of the month, right? Lowest tide of each day. So you have 3 inches. There's no boat cradle here. There's no boat lift. So that means that just about every boat of any significant size, except, like I said, maybe a dinghy, is going to bottom out. And I have Mr. Owens is going to try to join the call, but he had a conflict. So he sent me an email. I paraphrased in my last letter, my last conversation with him, but I'm just going to read this. John, FYI, when I had my boat docked at 789, this is in 2019, it's the only year he tried to keep his boat there, I found it to have little depth below mid-tide and at times not navigable to safely launch or return to the dock until I'd waited for the water level to rise. So this dock is not providing suitable access for a boat of substantial size. I don't know, and I was told by Kevin at the DEP that that some independent contractor went and made a determination that it is suitable. I've asked for any information about that. I'm not aware of it. No one's provided me any information. If anyone's done any.
Mr. Casey, no, that was the harbor master had indicated that he talked to our mooring contractor. There was no independent contractor. So
okay.
I don't even know if the harbor master and the mooring contractor had that conversation or if they did what they talked about. But that was what I understood the harbor master was checking to be sure that there was enough water at the dock to accommodate Mr. Owens' boat. That's
okay.
where that comes from. There's no independent contractor.
Oh, okay. So who's that mooring contractor? Maybe.
It's Pequot Yacht Club is our mooring contractor.
Oh. Is that Mr. Engborg?
I don't know if Mr. Engborg and the harbor master had that conversation, but the Pequot Yacht Club, is at the harbor all day long, and the folks that work there, set our moorings, and they're very familiar with depths and boat sizes and what boats draw. And it was my understanding that the harbor master had a conversation with Mr. Engborg. What they said, I was not privy to the conversation, but that's what I relayed to Mr. Zavoy. There was no independent contractor.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know if Mr. Engborg's still on the call. If that conversation happened.
I don't think that's appropriate for us to put Mr. Engborg in that situation at this point.
Well, if he has information that might help the commission determine whether we don't know. I don't know what and I don't think this commission knows, because as you just said, Madam Chair, you weren't privy to any conversation. All we have is a unsubstantiated, conclusion, and what we have before you, what we've presented, is an Army Corps survey that shows 4 to 5 inches at mean low or low water, and you have Mr. Owens' statement that the dock was basically unusable.
Right, and I don't think anybody on the commission is willing to is thinking that they are going to doubt the Army Corps of Engineers survey.
Okay.
I think that we all believe that's good data, and if there's only 4 inches of water or 3 inches of water at the northern end of the dock, then if the Army Corps of Engineers says that's the case, then that's the case. So I
would say that undermines the harbor master's conclusion that this dock is suitable for berthing a vessel of substantial size. As I wrote,
the question turns on whether the applicant is entitled to 24-hour access from his dock, and if not, he gets to jump the line for 72 people to get a mooring. And it's pretty clear in my mind, your position is that's what entitles him, and we have guidance from our consultant that that's not the case, and we're going to have to consider that and perhaps have a special meeting to further consider where the commission stands on that.
I'd say not only
if we accept the Army Corps' depth, which I agree with Kim, we're not questioning it. The question is, there's a pretty substantial tide cycle in this harbor, and how much of the tide cycle is reasonable? An hour, 10 minutes, 2 hours? We have to talk about that, I think.
Well, then, sir, what you're left with is if the boat bottoms out, you have two issues. You have Mr. Owens. I don't know how many of you, I don't know what boats you have. I assume you're boaters. I assume you understand, the problem with having your boat bottom out once, possibly twice every day. So to that end, I would say the dock can't berth any boat. So, and you have your commissions, and I would hope you would stand by your commission's prior determination that the dock is suitable for onloading and offloading, and that the property owner's boat should be kept at a mooring in the harbor. That was the setup. That was the setup that was proposed and agreed to 10 years ago. And I don't think it should depend. I mean, the rights and the usage of docking structures shouldn't depend on the identity of the property owner. It should depend on the nature of the property itself. And so that if it wasn't good enough for Mr. Hall and these other people, if people had a mooring and then they moved to a waterfront property and now they had a dock, why do they get to keep both? I mean, the justification that you have a crowded harbor and that you need to provide as much mooring space for the public, it would seem that as soon as someone with a mooring buys waterfront property with a dock, that they would all lose their moorings at that point, and that you wouldn't care one way or another whether that dock provided them 24-hour access or if it was appropriate for their boat or not. It should seem that if you provide moorings for waterfront property owners, you should provide them for all. I'm pointing out here that in this case in particular, and my job is to focus on the particular, is that for this property and for this rather small boat, and maybe we wouldn't even be having this conversation if Mr. Owens had a boat with a large keel, that even for his current boat, this dock is not suitable for 24 hours. I won't even say 24-hour access. I'll say 24-hour berthing, because it's going to rest on the bottom. So I didn't finish my thought earlier. It's not good for the boat. It's also not good for the environment. I've seen and I know that DEP has at times enforced against people whose boats rest on the bottom. The Army Corps doesn't like it when boats rest on the bottom. So that's why those agencies typically understand that docks with limited water at low tide that their owners are also going to obtain a mooring, so that you minimize those impacts.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Mr. Casey?
No, I mean, I've provided a lot, as I said, and I think this is a probably frustrating situation for everyone. I would never expect something like this to go on. I do want to point out that the way, and I've noted this, the number of moorings, obviously there's a limited space, but your harbor management plan also just mentions that, it's also limited by the number of parking spaces, and that littoral property owners' moorings obviously don't count towards the parking space limitation. So if you can find a spot for Mr. Owens' boat, as you did in the past for Mr. Hall's boat, that doesn't take a spot away from the public, because it doesn't take away a parking spot. And so people will still have access through the public access points to have a mooring. I'd like to believe it's not a zero-sum game, that properly managed, Mr. Owens can have a mooring, and it will not unreasonably impact the public's right to have moorings as well. Just looking at my notes here.
It is an either or. If Mr. Owens were to be given a mooring in advance, instead of the people waiting on the waiting list, it's an either or. So it is a zero-sum game. One is going to get it, and the other is not. One person has a dock, and the other does not. I'm struggling to understand why it shouldn't be a zero-sum game. There's a limited number of moorings. Only some applicants have docks.
Perhaps a mooring location close in to Mr. Owens' dock, which would be sufficient for him, and because if he had to keep his boat at the dock, and I'm getting into the weeds a little bit here, but if there's no boat kept at the dock, you can keep a boat on a mooring closer to the area of the dock, but that wouldn't be possible with a public mooring, because obviously you'd need to leave enough room to navigate to and from the dock. But if it's his own dock, if it's own boat right off the dock, no one else is going to try to get to that dock except him. So.
Commissioners, any other questions? Go ahead.
I was going to say, but nonetheless, given the fact that your harbor management plan provides for priority moorings, the decision has already been made. I understand the desire and the sentiment to open up public access as much as possible. I know that's an issue up and down the coast. But when your own harbor management plan recognizes the priority of waterfront property owners, then I think you need to be consistent with that plan and be consistent with past practices of the harbor master and the commission.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Casey. You do, of course, understand that we have been advised by DEEP that we are not in a position, even if we were to decide this evening that Mr. Casey, we thought that the harbor master had erred when he denied Mr. Owens a permit, that we are not in a position to give Mr. Casey a mooring, that decision can only be made by a harbor master, and we don't have a harbor master.
Madam Chair, no, I understand that. No, I appreciate that. I would think that if the commission were to agree with Mr. Owens in this situation, that it would pass on its determination as to the compliance and consistency with its harbor management plan and its rules to the next harbor master, and that the harbor master, being required by statute to make his decisions consistent with the harbor management plan, that if there was a affirmative statement that granting Mr. Owens a mooring would be consistent with the harbor management plan, then that determination would have to be respected by the harbor, the next harbor master. And since Mr. Owens isn't going to put his boat on the mooring, given his the problems he had 2 years ago when he tried it, at this point there's no intention to put to bring the boat into the harbor and risk it being damaged by grounding at low tide. So
Okay.
that's what we would foresee as the best outcome for Mr. Owens. Direction to the incoming harbor master.
Such as we can give. But
such as you can
sure.
give. My experience is that harbor masters, as I believe I've witnessed with your commission, harbor masters and commissions work in cooperation to make decisions like this.
Right.
And that I would find it odd that a harbor master would completely disregard a determination by a commission in a case like this, if you found that granting a mooring was consistent with your plan.
Right. Well, we may not find that it's consistent with the plan. That we may find it. We may decide on other grounds, and that is yet to be determined. So, stand by.
I was just trying to address your question, your point as to having a final outcome. In the next month or so. We understand that an actual mooring permit, if it was to be granted, has to be granted by a harbor master when that person is put into office.
Okay, great. Okay,
Kim,
great.
this is Jeff.
Yeah, Commissioners, Jeff. Yep, go ahead, please.
Well, I don't mean to go before the other commissioners. Just a couple things. I'd sort of like to have a discussion with a representative from DEEP concerning the definition of reasonable access and how they interpret that how DEEP interprets that access, since they have a regulatory role and they're in effect the administrator of the, if that's the right word, of the public trust area. And then another question, since I'm not too bright in these manners, but Mr. Casey, what happens if Mr. Owens moves away, or he's no longer associated, or he's no longer the property manager? Does the entity controlling the LLC then assign someone else who would apply for the mooring as the representative of this of the LLC, or as using the property rights to what happens if Mr. Owens doesn't have a boat anymore or moves away?
Well, given that the property rights and the use of the dock go with the property owner, it would seem to me that this property could always have a mooring. If it was sold to Bob Smith and
Bob Smith's a friend of mine. There is a fellow named Bob
but
Smith.
so if we remove the complicated ownership structure that you mentioned earlier, I don't even know that we wouldn't be having this conversation. I think there's always going to be someone that would have a right to a mooring at the property.
So whoever controls the LLC would designate someone then that would apply for a mooring permit. and that.
I believe, I believe so. Since the
Right.
property can be owned by an LLC, and as we've noted in our letter, there's actually a few LLCs that own waterfront property and also have moorings. That I was hoping we wouldn't go back to this ownership issue. I thought it had been put to bed.
Can we please avoid the ownership issue? But Jeff, did you have another question?
No. I just I do have to leave the meeting. I know you don't need me, but in the next reasonable period of time, I've got to leave.
Okay. Commissioners, how would you like to proceed? We have to have a finding this evening or a special meeting.
Kim, this is Mark. I would prefer to end the discussion for tonight and try to plan a special meeting, if that's okay with the other commissioners.
I would totally agree.
Okay. So I guess Jack, thoughts? Jack, you there?
So Jack, we're not hearing you. Maybe you're muted.
Maybe are you muted?
I'm sorry, I'm here.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts about?
I'm not opposed to a special meeting.
I'm sorry?
I'm certainly not opposed to having a special meeting to further discuss this particular applicant and the assertion tonight that all people with docks in the harbor, wherever they are in the harbor management area, is entitled to a priority mooring.
Okay. So I don't think there are any other commissioners in attendance. We can certainly plan to have a special meeting to continue this discussion. Jeff, I assume that your conversation with Deep would be part of that meeting. How much time do you think you would need to get that taken care of?
I can raise the issue now, and then like you said, there's no real simple answers to all of these things. We're trying to do our best to serve the public interest, and but I'll start working on that now to see what information I can get, Kim.
Okay.
Although not right now, because
I understand.
Tomorrow.
I understand. Okay. Okay. So commissioners, I don't know what people's various vacation schedules and lives require, but we could certainly plan to meet on either August 3rd or August 10, which is Tuesday. Have any thoughts
I may
about that?
be away the first part of August.
Okay.
It's Harry.
Yep. So August 10 would be better?
Yeah, I think that would be better for me.
Okay. That's within our 60 days.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, why don't we tentatively plan for August 10, same time, same place. I'll get an agenda together, and we'll plan to do that.
Okay.
Okay.
That would be good with me.
Okay. In the meantime, is there any other new business, any other issues that we need to address this evening? Okay, thank you, everybody. That was a good discussion, and And could I have not hearing that there's anything else we need to discuss, could I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
So I have two motions to adjourn. Can I have it?
I'll second that.
I'll second it.
Jack beat you to it, Harry. So Harry moved to adjourn and Jack second. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay. Super, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Bye. Thank you.
All right.
Good night all.
Good night.
Good night.